down there. Go through. Just because there's. Let's get rid of that other one. I gotta show it this. All right. Thank you guys for helping me with that. It's technology. Hi, my name is John Damratoski. I've been working in information security now for about 13 years. Got my start, kind of probably similar to a lot of you in this room, working for the government up in the Beltway. Did a couple of years of that, and then ended up moving to Nashville in about 2007. So starting about... There we go. We're gonna go this way. Starting about 7 years ago, I've worked in DLP exclusively. So what I try to do with these talks is kind of keep it interactive. There's probably a lot of questions, a lot of confusion, a little bit of misinformation out there on DLP. So as I go through the slide deck, we're going to kind of talk about the basics. We're going to kind of do a little bit of role play towards the end. And then if you have any questions, raise your hand as we go, or we'll go to the end. And we got 40 minutes, so I do not want to make sure you're late for lunch. So, okay. What are we talking about today? So a couple of things. What is DLP? Not data light projector. Data loss prevention, obviously. We're going to talk about one of the big things with DLP as far as taking a business-driven approach. We're going to kind of get into the details of why DLP is a little bit different than probably some of the normal security technologies that some of us have dealt with in this room. We're going to talk about the three main details, and what that third bullet there is data in use, data in motion, and data at rest. And we'll go into what those mean. We'll talk a little bit about, okay, so you got this cool DLP tool going, it's running, it's seeing stuff. What do I do next? How do I extract that data out of that tool? How do I report on it? How do I turn that into business speak to give to those managers, those kind of people to digest it and get your value out of it? And then at the end there, we're going to go through two quick use cases to kind of see how we can talk about some of the things we're going to go over. So what is DLP? That number one word on that first bullet is the big catch. DLP is context aware. What we mean by that is that we're not looking at ones and zeros necessarily. What we're looking at is we're looking at data at your organization that you have decided is confidential. And every company, that can mean different things, obviously. There's a lot of out-of-the-box kind of stuff. We talked about credit cards, PII, PHI. But, doing probably a lot of the government defense around here, I'm sure there's a lot of stuff unique to your business that, a commercial business that I typically deal with in Nashville probably doesn't see. So those are both important information, and those are both things that we can apply to you with the DLP program. Kind of sub-bullet point there, that's the next step. Once you've done DLP for a little while, you've got it tuned, you're happy with what you're seeing, the end goal eventually is to make a prevention with that tool. Now, whether that could mean a lot of things. That could mean I block your email that has that engineering document that you sent out to your Gmail to work at home this weekend. That could be, if you're using the USB stick right here for the presentation, that I try to write data to that, I block that too. It could also mean some other more advanced things that we'll get into here in the slide. The other second thing there, this is another key point, and this is something that us techies really have a pain with sometimes, and this is a business-driven tool that security people manage. It's not the other way around. We're not firewall people that we write the rules and we tell them what they're going to do. It's more of, we unfortunately have to sometimes take their input and do what they say. And so if you don't take that business-driven approach, DLP may not work out as well as you would hope it might. And then part of that is that, working with your business team, you're going to determine what your policies look like, what that confidential information that you actually want to catch, and what you're going to do with it long term. So, business-driven approach. So the first thing we talk about, if you're brand new to DLP and you've just bought it and you want to go to implement your environment, is we're not talking tech yet. We're going to sit down with whoever owns what you've considered confidential information, whether that be a director of engineering, maybe somebody who works in HR, somebody who works in compliance, and say, hey, what is the kind of confidential information that we want to protect with this software? Obviously, every industry, every vertical is different. But you got to start off with, let's just get on the marker board right over here in the corner and just start marking, all right, PHI. PII, marketing diagrams. Obviously, if anything that's classified, you're on SIPRNet, NIPRNet, doing that kind of stuff. So you just kind of want to start that brainstorm right there. Some of the things you want to talk about is okay, so we have this information. What is acceptable use of that? What is normal business use and transfer of that information that is 100% allowed today? So maybe that means that if you're in the healthcare space, we're allowed to send claims data from Blue Cross Blue Shield of Alabama to a provider or back and forth. Okay, so you kind of just jot that down. And you kind of go through that list for all of the confidential information that you've came up with. And then at the end of the day, we also want to talk about what's unacceptable use. What would you be concerned with the most? Well, if somebody wants to work from home and they're not using the VPN and they're just using their Gmail account and they're going to go work on their personal laptop, if you saw that confidential information go out of your corporate email to a personal Gmail account, whether it's for good reasons or bad, do you want to do something about that? Do you want to block it? Do you want to allow it? Do you just want to get a report every Friday night that says, hey, there's all the people who did this week? Do you want that to be real time? And kind of go into those details of what's unacceptable. It's tricky, huh? Oh. Hold out a sec here. Fingers crossed. We good? Okay. All right, so we talked about the workshop, more business driven. The next step is, okay, so we've got this information. We know what is important to us. We know where we want to use it, where we don't want to use it. What's the next step? Yeah, we're gonna. Are we good?
Mentally good.
Okay. The next part is, this is where we start getting into the technology piece a little bit. All right, so where do we want to apply this? We've got a couple different options here, and this is where we get into the data at use, the data at rest, and data in motion. Now, with DLP, there's three main areas. Typically, network is the most popular. And what I mean by network is that is using DLP to monitor egress web traffic and mail traffic. Pretty standard. That's what most companies start with. The next step would be data in use. That's anything on this laptop, that desktop, or even your mobile phone if you choose to integrate that with DLP. The last step there is data at rest. And what that is that we know that all companies on the planet typically hoard information and don't really keep track of it. So there's probably data sitting at large companies especially that's 10, 15 years old. That's probably, some of it is sensitive, obviously. Do you need it? Do you not need it? And so what DLP can do is actually take those policies that you've designed and go out and scan NASs, scan SharePoint sites, and help you identify where that data might be. There are some preventative actions we can do there, but that's really, you're just trying to make a giant assessment of where my stuff is at and how do I get a control over it. The last bullet there, we'll get into that here in a little bit on, but with DLP, like any technology, you don't want to go all in the first Monday morning you flick the switch. You do really want to take your time. You want to get the tool going. You want to tune the policies, get comfortable, get the accuracy acceptable to your organization. Don't go in and say, all right, every time somebody sends a credit card number with a match count of 1, block. Okay, so they come in Monday morning, I log into a website, I try to buy something, and it gets blocked, whether it's legitimate or not. And it happens all the time because people sometimes are a little eager, and it can backfire for you long term. So just be kind of careful. All right, DLP policies. We've mentioned it before. What is a policy? The policy is the guts of the tool. That's just like an antivirus signature. That is the art and science of, depending on which tool vendor you go with, where you go in, and that's your filter. You go in and you write logic to say, okay, if I see a match count of 3 credit card numbers combined with the words MasterCard or Visa, that's an incident. If I see an engineering diagram in a certain format, that's an incident. It can mean a couple different things. A lot of the tools ship with out-of-the-box stuff. So that's your standard credit card, PHI, combination of medical keywords with the social. And then in addition to that, you can do a lot of custom stuff. And that's where you're really going to kind of get into the value, especially in unique environments. What should we talk about here? A lot of different types of technologies. You can do basic regex. That's a kind of a good start. You also can do something in there is another one that especially large healthcare companies lately is the indexing aspect. So let's say you work at a company and you've got a long, massive database of PII for your clients. So it has a first name, a last name, an address, a social, a member ID, phone number. It can be 15 characters, sets of data long. You can actually export that out into a couple of different formats, and you can create a policy that says, hey, every, once a week, I want you to scan all my data from my client lists or my vendor lists, and make that a policy. And then even once you create that policy, you can say, hey, if I see 2 or 3 combination of one, first, last, and social, boom, incident. And so the sky's the limit, kind of how you want to design that. And you've got to work with your compliance folks usually to determine what's acceptable to you or not. And then as you get more comfortable with the tool and get used to using it, you can start combining logic to do a lot of really creative things. You can increase accuracy. You can kind of look for those needle in the haystacks. Really, the sky's the limit there. Deployment planning. This is where we say start small. You want to crawl, walk, run is kind of an analogy I like to make a lot right now. Normally, most companies, especially if you're not as security conscious as others, you want to start small, and that can mean different things. Most companies do start with the network, just because egress email doesn't really have a lot of content management besides whatever you might have in Exchange monitoring things. So that's kind of your wide open west. Lately, the last 2 years, especially with this BYOD thing going on, bless you. Some companies are really going after the endpoint now, and maybe that's because everyone's a desktop admin and has install rights to everything, and anyone can plug in any of these USB sticks that we're going to get at this conference today, and I can put all my data on that. I can get on the airplane, and then I can lose my bag, and so then it's a data loss. So it's really it's organizational specific. And the next step there is pick a couple policies. One customer I worked at had about 70 DLP policies, and it was so much it's drinking from a fire hose. The staff couldn't keep on top of it. So we like to say, start with a low amount, 3 to 5 to 10, get it going, get it comfortable. Manage your incidents carefully. So don't go in there and click every little button, turn it on, and then all of a sudden you have 100,000, 200,000 incidents a day. Because chances are, I don't think any company on the planet has the staff to go through each one of those and go, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. As it matures, obviously you can start adding things. So you've done network for a while, you set up your 2 basic engineering diagram policies and your PII. You've run it 6 months. You like it. All right, let's start growing. Maybe the next step is go to the endpoint. Since you've started with email, now you're on the endpoint. A good place to start on endpoint, it kind of depends. If you've got the endpoint locked down very well to where nobody can proliferate data with a USB stick, maybe you start monitoring Outlook on the client, or you start looking for just paper prints, so print or print to fax. That's one area that some companies look at. Let's say everyone in your company is a desktop admin, has install rights. I really would start with just show me everything that goes to USB. Because a lot of companies would be shocked, especially when employees decide to leave organizations. They might take things that you don't want them to take, whether there's a contract against it or not, and that's another big area that DLP is working in a lot lately. So you've got 3 policies, you've run it 6 months, you take the second step, it runs 3 to 6 months, you're happy. All right, maybe you're actually ready, and you've got management buy-in, you're ready to block stuff. So you do want to block that email that went out. You've worked with your users, you've educated them, you hopefully have notified them that here's the right way to do it, but we'll let that mail go through for now. Again, your boss is ready to back you up, because as soon as you hit that block button, that's when you're going to learn who's your friend. Because when your phone blows up, whether it's intentional or not, you want to make sure management's there to support that decision with the tool. The other thing is, this is a big point, and sometimes people get DLP confused with in-case or forensics. Hey, John D. just quit the company. We think he took a bunch of stuff. Can you put DLP on my box and see what he took? it doesn't work that way. I can't do a forensic analysis of the box. With DLP, it only starts to work once it's installed and once the policy is applied from that second forward. So you do have to do some proactive planning. And sometimes folks don't necessarily get that, especially in the legal world, because they're not technically oriented. The other thing is, in this area, if somebody does quit and you repossess their equipment right here, you have to decide, is it more important to take a forensic analysis or an image of that box first? Or there could be DLP incidents on this box right now that have not been synced up to the management server. And do you want to put that on the wire and lose your chain of custody? So that's something that if you do a lot of work in that area, you want to think through that very carefully. What's more important to you? Okay, data in motion. So this is where we're going to kind of dive into the technical side. What this means. This monitors SMTP, basic web traffic, and HTTPS if you have another tool doing the SSL breakdown. So DLP is not a web proxy. It can't do man in the middle. However, more security conscious companies, especially large ones, are already doing this to some degree with their proxies. So if you are doing man in the middle breakdown with ICAP, you can plug DLP right in and take a sniff of that unencrypted traffic. But just to kind of a little asterisk there is DLP can't do that, so you've got to design that into your technology solution. Mail is the most common. One thing about mail is, you can do some damage from an information leakage perspective, but it's small, in my opinion. One mail, most limits are 5 meg, 10 meg. So yeah, that's a big Excel doc with 150,000 socials. But it's not nearly as the amount of data. I can't take gigs and gigs of information and emails unless I'm really good, like you could a USB. So that's something to think about there. It can be inline or passive, and this goes back to your original design. If you ever want to actually go into a prevention mode, as in a blocking or a stopping of that mail or that USB, you do have to build the DLP solution inline. So sometimes companies say, well, you know what? I just want to monitor. I want to see it go. I want to get reports, but I don't want to block. And so you put it in, and then you let it run 6 months, and everybody goes, oh my God, look what's going out the door. And you go, I want to block it. Great, but you know what? We got to redesign the whole solution and put it back in line. Some places that's not a big deal. Big companies, it usually is. So something you want to think about. What else here? Most common for mail. As far as proxy vendors, if you do go with the solution, you want to look at, what's it compatible with on the proxy side. Not all DLP solutions are common with compatible with every single proxy vendor out there. They're compatible with most, but some environments I've worked with, they've picked not to pick on Checkpoint, but they have Checkpoint firewalls, and they've picked X DLP solution. And unfortunately, the two vendors don't get along, and so we couldn't adapt DLP to their HTTPS monitoring, and that was just how we had to move forward. But so you kind of just want to do your basic homework there on the integration side. Passive monitoring is out there. I don't like this for a couple of reasons. One, if you're just doing inside-to-inside network monitoring to say what, Division A is doing to Division B, passive's great, right? That's data that hasn't left your company. It isn't a loss. It isn't a risk. I don't like looking at passive monitoring leaving the company because you know what? That data just left. It left, and there ain't nothing you can do about it. And so I actually did a talk about a year ago with a technology attorney, and he kind of nicks the same thing. He says, look, if you can't act on the data, if you can't fix it or go after it, could be a bigger problem to leave passive monitoring egress your company on than to just turn it off and focus on other more advantageous things with DLP. I'm not to say turn a blind eye, but that's something you have to weigh with your team.
Corporate negligence.
What can you do? It's like IDS versus IPS. 10 years ago, Snort was great, and then people said, wait a minute, I want to start blocking it in real time. So it can turn into a liability. Now, if you're very aggressive, let's say, and you are going after that passive leak and can do something about it, great. But to be honest, most companies view that as the lower level of risk, and that's one of those, I'll get around to it, around Christmas time when I have a week to catch up kind of thing. So you just have to decide there. And I've seen some companies say one thing, and I've seen other ones just say, I don't care. So the answer is it depends, unfortunately. And then again, we talked about inline. Most companies, I would highly, highly recommend put it in line. There are safeguards built in all of these tools. There's a button called trial mode that says you click this button, and even if it's in line, nothing you can do will ever block anything until you unclick it. So if you're new to the tool or you add some new users that aren't familiar with it, it's a dummy button to keep you from hurting yourself. And we always use that coming out of the box. Data in use. This is the endpoint. 5 years ago, people were afraid to touch the endpoint because we all had 1 gig of RAM. And AV was sucking 300 meg up and don't slow my machine down. Well, now, this is the big one. This is probably going to surpass network here pretty soon for what I'm seeing. And the reason for that is numerous. The cases I've seen that actually have gone to legal or even criminal have always been on the endpoint. Just because, again, not to pick on USB sticks, but gigs of data takes, 30 seconds to transfer? That's a lot of data. I can do a lot of damage very quickly. So what does it do? It does a lot of different things. It can monitor local disk, it can monitor USB, it can monitor printing, print to fax. Kind of the newest areas, it'll actually monitor applications. So you say, hey, I want you to monitor Safari, IE, and Mozilla, and if someone types in a social, I want you to block it. That is an option. More and more companies are using that today. The only thing is you just got to kind of just weigh the performance impact. It is very low if you think it through, but sometimes there can be software is not perfect anywhere. We know this. The more software you put on things, some of this can start happening. So that's brand new. I mean, a lot of companies are starting to do that out of box. They've got built-in box. They've got in Google, all sorts of those. And that would actually fall under endpoint right here. So you can go in and say, hey, if it goes to box, block it automatically. Or you can go in and say, if it goes to your company.box.com account, allow it, block everything else. Those are very, very valid options today. You can look at it 2 ways. You can actually take some of those policies we talked about earlier and say, hey, let's look for content. Or you can just say, hey, show me everything. And for most companies, I like to start with just show me everything on the USB. I don't care if it has a social or a credit card number. I want to kind of gauge the picture of what is really going on the endpoint outside of our control. So you kind of do have to decide about that too. The second bullet point there is huge. Does this thing work when I'm at BSides right now? Yeah. If I had DLP running and I'm copying credit card numbers onto that stick and throwing it on that Mac right there, it is working. But here's the catch. The management server at your company doesn't know it happened yet. So all that data is being cached, locally encrypted on this box, and the first time I either VPN or connect to my network and Monday morning at the office, that data gets pushed up. So that kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier where people quit and leave the company. You got to make that call. So it does work offline. If you do a lot of policy updates, if you're changing your policies daily, which most companies don't do, the user, or me in this case, on this box won't get that policy again until I log in. So it kind of says it's using the configuration it was given last Friday at 4 o'clock when I was last at the office, and it'll carry that configuration forward until I get the new config the first time I log in. Yes, sir? Yes, sir.
How would that affect it?
You can slice and dice it anyway. So I've seen companies do that. So they'll have, not to pick on IronKey, but IronKey's one that's easily corporate managed. So they had IronKeys. So if you got issued an IronKey from that company, it's not cheap, but you use it. DLP said, I don't care. Don't let it use it. If you quit, we can hit the remote blow up button. We had options, right? For every other USB, report on it. We didn't block it, we just reported on it. And then eventually we did move to block. We could use AD groups, but we actually would just use device IDs and just go through the vendors that way. So you can do both. Thing with AD, actually I got on a really nasty phone call yesterday with a client that wasn't happy. AD isn't always sanitary at all companies. We know this, especially the larger ones. You don't necessarily actually remove users. We just delete their accounts when they come and go. It's not always clean. There's special characters in there some of our tools don't like. You can use AD, but you want to be very careful though. And make sure it's clean, because if John was in the allowed group last week and then someone put me in the disallowed group but didn't remove me from the old one, guess what? that's going to conflict down here. So just kind of think it through very carefully, but absolutely. Do you have any other questions on that? Okay. Yeah, we talked about that. You got a lot of different solutions within the policies about what is allowed and what is not allowed. You kind of just want to think those through as use cases on your marker board when you get started to that. One other thing about endpoint here I haven't really gotten into, the clients are getting much more efficient in their resource use lately. So not to pick on some other vendors I will not name, but let's say 5 years ago, one DLP vendor needed 210 meg of RAM just to sit there and listen. And this was a global company that had some boxes with 512 and gig RAM overseas. And so guess what? That endpoint client destroyed those boxes. Today, it's a lot lean and meaner. 20 meg, 30 meg, and you actually have buttons. You can go in there and say, do not exceed this much memory and do not exceed this much CPU to kind of keep that footprint really low. So it is getting a lot better, but again, in certain situations, you just want to test it out a little bit before you deploy to endpoint. Data at rest. This has been out there for a while. Some companies I've worked with, they like the idea until they see how much work this is. Not because of the tool, but because, again, who in here has thrown away corporate data that you guys have said, hey, it's 5 years old and we don't need it? Yeah, okay, one. You're the first one I've ever seen do that. Most companies don't, for whether it's legal reasons, data retention reasons. Hey, we bought this company 3 companies ago, gobbled each other up. We don't want to lose the data in case somebody comes after us. Okay, great. That's where this tool comes in. The problem here is you got to be very careful with scope. Somebody called about a year ago when I was working with a big healthcare client, global, and they said, we want to scan 5 petabytes of data. 5. Okay, so I got out Excel one afternoon and started pounding out how this would scale, and it scared them. And I said, well, let's take it back a little bit. When I told them, take over 100 servers, 6 months, 24/7, 5 people, all these things. So they took a step back and said, let's start small. Let's just attack open shares. So we have NASs, we have open shares where maybe there's, in this case, they had Remedy running and people were putting socials in Remedy that weren't supposed to do it. And so they just wanted to attack that high risk. So we scan just the Remedy system. You can also scan SharePoint. NASs are the most common. There's a lot of different vendors supported out there, so chances are whatever tool you go with will be supported. SharePoint's up and coming. The reason for that is SharePoint is collaboration, right? Let's just be honest, a lot of business folks aren't the most security conscious, and that's why we're here to help them. And so there's usually no controls on SharePoint sites. I don't know if you've worked with them much, but a lot of them are anyone in the company can read, or they said, oh, I locked it down, and you go in there and there's 5,000 people who could actually read it. I'm not saying 5,000 people did read it, but it's a lot more open. And so SharePoint's actually becoming a lot higher topic there. And then database. You can scan databases. It doesn't necessarily scale the best, but it does technically work. One area you could do there in the database is you can export that data out into text files or CSVs and scan through it a lot quicker. But that is an option too. So we've got this tool. We've decided where to write the policies, where to apply it. What do I do now? Okay, so you got the management console. Different vendors call them different things. These are where your incident response people log in and go, okay, did that email really contain 100 credit card numbers, or are those just false positives? The key thing here is you do that second bullet there is huge. You don't have to hire, typically a lot of people work in this area, maybe might be new to technology. They're eager, they want to learn. Maybe they're from the incident response side, so they're not necessarily DLP experts, but you want to have somebody who can start going through and watching the patterns. Every company is a little bit different as far as how people work, how data comes and goes, things like that. You want to have somebody in that console, ideally full-time. I know that's not possible at a lot of places, especially smaller shops. But the more that same person or groups of people can log into that console and go through, the more value. The other thing here is you do not want to create more incidents than you can get to triage and manage in a reasonable amount of time. What is a reasonable amount of time? Go ask your attorney, and here's why. Some companies might generate one. I worked with last year was generating about 7,000 DLP instances a day. You know how many incidents they were actually looked at? For a while, there was 0. Once we got good, it was 1,000. Okay, so what about those other 6,000 incidents? Well, something happens and there's some litigation issues, and guess what? Well, they want to come get a copy of that data to go look at it. Oh, wait, incident number 4,241 last year happened, and you didn't look at it. Well, we were too busy. That's not going to hold up, and that's becoming more and more of a challenge. So at the end of the day, don't drink more from the fire hydrant than you can really consume and digest. And so you got to make that call. Is it 5 business days? Is it 10 business days? Is it 1 month? Is it just the high and mediums that we care about? We ignore the lows. Whatever you do, when you come up with this, you probably do want to sit down with legal or whoever else you need to work with and kind of just outline what your expectations are there. The more you work here, the more value you're going to get out of it. Reporting, if we can't give results from our tools, after 6, 12 months, somebody's going to go, well, why do we have this tool? What's the value? And this is also where you get an opportunity to create these fancy reports, whether it's in Excel or it's in the console itself, and distribute it to your management and bosses. They're probably, this is where you kind of bridge the gap from tech to business. So maybe folks that are good at that kind of communication may be more preferable, but whatever works for you guys is what you probably want to stick with. Okay, so these consoles, all of them, they all do a great job reporting on the console, but you know what? You don't want a bunch of CIOs and CEOs going through your console because they don't necessarily know what they're looking at, and they're going to flip out when they see some of the data. So what do we want to do? We want to report out, and this is where you kind of have to decide. I hate to say this, but the most common reports in DLP for the last couple of years is Excel. It's not sexy, but it works. Once you get in there, once you know what the red, yellow, green light approach that your management company wants to see out of it, you can export that data out. You can create pivot tables. You can do that. There are some other tools, depending on which vendors you go with. I have seen some do crystal reports, if that's something you're comfortable doing. If you're with Symantec, there's another tool out there called IT Analytics. They'll throw it to you for free to help do some elevated reporting. Another DLP tool I worked back with a couple years ago, we just did straight SQL Server queries and created some reporting services pages. That worked too, but you got to look at each vendor does things a little bit differently. So use cases. So we talked about a lot of different stuff here. Let's talk about how do we apply this. Okay, so large healthcare. Again, I'm not picking on them, but I live in Nashville, and so that's kind of the town right now. So we've got a large healthcare company. What do they care about the most? Obviously, PHI for HIPAA, and every company on the planet probably cares about PII to some degree. Okay, so how are they going to approach this? In this case, they want to create an index, and what that is they're lucky they've got one database with all of their PII and PHI data, and so every Saturday night at 6 p.m. they create an export of that out. We have DLP go in and scan that massive amount of data. One company I worked with, we had data on about 120 million citizens of the U.S. So we had about a third of the country at some point in there. It took a few minutes. DLP was very efficient. It created that policy, and then it took that policy back in and pushed it out to all the servers. It took all about maybe 20, 30 minutes, and it was done. And that was our policy that says, hey, if you see first, last, and social, or you see address, phone number, and first name, boom, that's a DLP incident. So that was one way, and that was the most accurate way because those were past and former members of that company. So chances are it's pretty accurate. What else did they do? Well, because of that IDM was only running once a week, we also created some basic out-of-the-box policies that says, hey, if you see some medical keywords and you see something that looks like a social or what their member ID looked like, let's also trigger on that. So that's kind of the 1 week gap, just in case you're not in the member data yet. We're going to still catch it another way. What else do they do? Where do they apply it? Well, obviously they want to watch web traffic. We saw a lot going on, especially with stuff to like Box.com was starting to become more popular. Email, that's the old regular. That's the kind of low and slow. You got a 5 meg file attachment, so the biggest thing you're going to see is probably Adobe claims or something in Excel. In addition to, we did do some DAR, especially on the open shares. We didn't go with the whole 5 petabyte of data because they were afraid, but we started small and kind of got them built up on that. And then also, this was another thing, that last point there, we did do some work with external SharePoint. They do have some sites that they share with vendors. I got 5. We felt that was pretty high risk because, again, it's SharePoint and the controls weren't the tightest. So we felt we wanted to go after that, and we did. What else did they do? Long term, they're going to move to the endpoint for copy to USB. They were pretty confident. They had an AV client that had good controls over, I could not plug in USBs. While I never tested it, working with some folks there, they said it's probably not nearly as robust as they thought. And so they want to do a double check of what we think we're doing versus what we're really doing. So. Next one, small manufacturing. There's probably a lot of. Do you have a question, sir?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Data function and SMTP integration. So you talked about proxy integration.
Yep.
Do you have the same concern with SMTP, or how does SMTP over TLS?
So there's a couple options. Depending on the vendor, what you do is you actually put yourself between your, let's say, Exchange server, DLP server, next hop. So your MTA going out. Most of the technology solutions now, they're not real MTAs. And so if they actually keep a connection open and real time between the two. So when they crash, you don't lose mail. And they're really, really good about that. There was an old vendor that's going away that did not do that, and I've had some problems in the past. But you do have to put it in line there. But honestly, last couple of years, I've never seen a mail lost. Basically, if they can't see both ends of the connections, they won't accept the mail and it closes. So, does that make sense?
Yeah, if you understand how you doing TLS interception.
Yeah.
Have your DLP.
Yeah, you put the certs on both sides, and they'll support TLS from the Exchange to, let's say, the SMTP prevent, and then from the box on and take no problem. You just got to set that up front. So that way, it's TLS all the way. So. Any other questions? Yes, sir. Okay. Wait. You mean moving traffic to USB? So in this case, we obviously DLP cannot decrypt that encrypted traffic. But what we were doing is a lot of companies, some are wild west. Let's just face it. Anyone can put any USB device in and take any data. Some might have endpoint controls, whether it's through their AV client or a third-party tool that very severely limits what they could transfer to a USB device. And so what we were doing is we were basically using DLP to show us what really was going on and said, hey, we don't care about content. We don't care about what kind of data. Just show us the data that is going to that box. And then it kind of raised a level of concern for them. That makes sense. Now, at the end of the day, yes, we could do a prevent and block, or we could maybe look at the tool, the third-party tool they were using to lock down the endpoint. Maybe it wasn't configured properly, which happens a lot, or there's some other options we had out there. But it was kind of an assessment of what really was going on. Does that answer your question? Okay, cool. Any others? I know I got about 3 minutes left. I don't want to be the guy that slows you for lunch. Okay, so next use case. This is probably applies a little more up here. Small manufacturing. Okay, so they've got a lot of different engineering design documents. I don't claim to know anything about mechanical or electrical engineering, but you got AutoCAD, MATLAB. You guys know more about it than I do, I'm sure. So what we did is we sat down and we first off, we identified what are the common file formats for their designs. We also created an index. They were lucky in that they stored all of their designs in certain files and folders. And so we said, hey, once a week, we're going to go in and scan each one of those, Division A folders, Division B folders, and just actually do an index of that and turn that into a policy. So if any of those documents left an email, which they had a corporate policy, should and would never happen, boom, we got an incident. So we worked there. In addition to, as a backup plan, since we knew there were common file formats that should have been there, not to say there wasn't, somebody with some one-off software right here that's doing something a little bit different, we actually did a basic DCM policy to look for those file formats that were outside, so file extension types, file headers, just in case they weren't in that index where they should have been. So it's kind of a second layer of protection. This company was a little bit unique. They're smaller, so they're looking at Office 365. So that's kind of a new challenge. There are DLP solutions aggressively chasing this as we speak. So you got two options. This particular company, they actually use the endpoint agent to put hooks into Outlook on their box and look at that email in real time. The reason for that is because between that O365 client here and the servers they were going to was encrypted, so we couldn't see that. The newest thing, which I have not added to the slide yet because it's brand new, you do have some cloud solutions there that do integrate with DLP right now, so you would have to look at your vendor and talk to them. There is a small cost, obviously, associated with that, but it is giving you a lot better technology there long term. So. They also wanted to just monitor copy to USB and printing, just because obviously in an engineering-heavy environment, there's a lot of prints going on, and they kind of want to keep track of paper documents. So last slide. What did we cover today? All right, so DLP, context. If anything we talked about, you want to think about driving home this afternoon, context. The next one, business-driven. You do have to start with your business folks first. I mean, we can't slam this technology down their throat. I've tried it. I've seen a lot of other people try it. It doesn't work very well. Talked a little bit about the differences, data in motion, data in use, and DAR, and then again, triage. If you can't show value, can't report, can't use the data in the tool and get it out to meaningful use, it's going to be a tough sell for you. And then use cases. And that's pretty much it for open questions. So, any other open questions? Yes, sir.
So, looking for DLP, but 3 levels. Is there an open source free solution, a low cost solution? What's the best?
Okay. So let me hit that in order. Open source there is. I don't think anyone's kept up on it. If you go out there and look, just type in open source DLP, it comes right up. Someone threw it out there, I want to say about 3 or 4 years ago, but basically it was a regex checker, and I don't think they had a big enough community to get it used to it. I hate to say it, but probably, Yes, sir.
I'm going to have to stop there.
Yeah.
I'm sure you'll be here all conference.
Yeah, I'll be right here. Come, we can talk around.
Pizza's either here or very soon going to be here, so we'll dismiss for lunch.
Yes.
And then afterwards, Adrian has the floor for the afternoon keynote.